You know, son, you're not a kid anymore.
Oh, no, I go to
shows.
Dad, I already know all this stuff.
Well, they don't teach you about everything
At shows.
Okay, Mr. Smarty Pants? So just listen. When boys and girls get a little older, they start getting
interested in punk and hardcore subgenres. Starter kit.
What's up, everyone? I'm going to take you through a bunch of different pieces that make up punk and hardcore music, whether it's the beats, whether it's like the type of part, whatever. So that's this starter kit. What I want to do first is I want to start off with the basic fast beat. So this is called double time. Basically what it means is that the drummer is hitting the hi-hat every 2 times for 1 time on the snare. And he's doing like a variation of do that, do that, do that, do that, do that on the kick drum and snare. So the first example here is Stalag 13. The song is Sometime. All right, I wanted to give one more example of double time. This is Madball CTYC, and you're going to be able to hear everything really clear because the recording is great. So you hear the kick drum, you hear everything really well. Here we go. All right, now I want to give an example of a fast cheat beat. So what this is when a drummer is doing kind of a cheater beat, right? So he's not going to do double time. Maybe the beat is too fast, so he can't do 2 hits on the hi-hat for every one on the snare. Maybe he just thinks it sounds chunky and good by just hitting the hi-hat and the snare at the same time on the 2 every time, right? So there's an example, like on Chain of Strength on the fast songs, Chris Bratton's doing that. But it sounds so dope because he's such a great drummer and he hits a lot of fills. But here's an example of the fast cheat beat. It's Battery. The song It's In Our Hands. All right, now I wanted to give an example of what we call the scissor beat, also known as the dicka dicka beat. This is when the drummer does the hi-hat on the 1, the snare on the 2, the hi-hat on the 3, the snare on the 4. So he's rotating back and forth with his beats, right? It's going hi-hat, snare, or cymbal, snare, cymbal, snare. But he's not doing double time. He's not doing the cheat where he's hitting everything together on the 2. So this first example is Agnostic Front Last Warning. All right, I want to give one more example of the scissor or the dicka dicka beat. This is Floor Punch, Not For Me. All right, true fans of 185 Miles South know this is a beat we've talked about a lot over the history of the pod. It's the do-dat-do-dat beat. And yeah, we got to use no effects for it, right? So this is the drummer's doing double time, but instead of doing do-dat, 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 he's going do-dat, 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 or a variation of that. Like the drum beat on the kick is busier. So this is no effects Lori Myers. All right, one of the most famous punk beats in the game is the D beat. It's a little slower than like the general hardcore punk fast beat, but yeah, the kick drum's very busy on it, and I can't do it with my mouth, so I'm going to play it for you. Got to go to the originators. This is Discharge, Mania for Conquest, doing the D beat. Now, a variation on the D beat that we talk about on the podcast is what we call the slow fast beat. It's basically the D beat, but the kick drum is less busy. So it's like the tempo of the D beat, but the drummer is just doing straight double time. So a perfect example of that is Integrity, this song Rise. I wanted to give one more example of this. This is Chain of Strength, Best of Times, doing the slow, fast beat. All right, and finally for drum beats, let's talk about the blast beat. This is done a lot in like grindcore and death metal. It's not done too much in straight hardcore, but a band that does it really tastefully is a band called Coke Bust, and I wanted to show you them doing the blast beat. The blast beat is basically you're hitting the snare every beat. So on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the snare is getting hit every time, and there's variations of how much you're hitting. Like if you're on the hi-hat or if you're on the ride, some insane foos can do it like double time or hit the same amount of times, or some people do like a variation that's like a cheat. But anyway, here is the blast beat. This is Coke Bust, the song Long Gone. All right, I wanted to dive into some tempos. So when we refer to like a slow song on the pod, here's an example of that. This is Cro-Mag's Malfunction. One more example of a slow song. This is Bad Religion, Drastic Actions.
Murder word, suicide. Not from one, but from thousands that tried. The lawyer's wife and the teenage.
Okay, I want to talk about what I consider a mid-tempo song. And a great example of that, we're going all the way back. Black Flag, Nervous Breakdown. This is what I consider mid-tempo.
I'm about to have a nervous breakdown. My head really hurts. If I don't find a way out of here.
All right, this is a weird one we talk about on the pod sometimes. Sometimes I say mid-tempo, up-tempo. What I mean by that is it's basically the fastest you could possibly do a mid-tempo beat where the guitarist can still downstrum. But you'll see, if we're calling like that beat, the Black Flag Nervous Breakdown beat, if we're calling that mid-tempo, here's an example of like a mid-tempo, up-tempo. This is Turbo Negro, Black Rabbit. All right, let's jump into some dance parts. So everyone knows mosh part, breakdown, this stuff. But I'm going to give some examples anyway because it's a starter kit and not everyone knows everything, right? So, and shit, I don't even know everything. I'm going to get blasted for all these. But let's jump in. This is an example of what I consider a mosh part. This is Harm's Way, Breeding Grounds. All right, here we go with another example of a mosh part. This is Hatebreed, Betrayed by Life. Betrayed by life! All right, so a little bit more up-tempo than a mosh part is what I consider a breakdown. Although a mosh part is also a breakdown, which is... This is all very confusing, right? But anyway, what the fuck? I thought it'd be a fun segment. So let me give you an example of what I consider a breakdown. It's kind of like the mid-tempo beat, and it can be a variation of like a little slower, a little faster, whatever. Great example, one of the best breakdowns of all time. Bad Brains Right Brigade. All right, another example of a breakdown. Madball, Across Your Face. Across your face! Across your face! All right, I should have done these. I should have done these in better order, like in descending speed or something. But consider like a breakdown in the middle. A mosh part's a little bit slower. This is even slower than a mosh part. This is a beatdown part. Let's go back to the originators. Bulldoze, Nothing But a Beatdown.
You think you're hard. You with your crew. Now it's time.
All right. And then the fastest example of like a breakdown is like a two-step part, right? So this is something that's very hard to mosh to, hard to floor punch to, or whatever. So that's when you see dudes like skanking around. It's a two-step part. An example of this is Floor Punch, the song Gaining Ground.
I can just feel the energy flowing in our veins. There's always
All right, this should have gone in the opening segment, I think, or back earlier. But I want to go over two different bounce beats. Madball does these both perfectly on the album Hold It Down. I want to show an example of a basic bounce beat. And so this is Madball Hold It Down. When we talk about a bounce beat, this is a perfect example.
Enough time been wasted, and now I'm faced with a reality. So what's the come of this say?
And then also there's a variation of that, right? It's a slow bounce beat. So if we consider like the regular bounce beat being like a mid tempo, this is like a slow bounce beat. An example is Madball Show No Fear. I want to talk about two parts that like used to be super, super crucial in hardcore and were done kind of a lot. And when the prevalence of like the mosh part came in, they kind of got pushed aside a bit. They're both buildups. And so there's a buildup on drums. And this is the best example because this song rips and this buildup is so perfect. Like by the time you get to the sing along at the end of the buildup, like you're just so hyped up to go nuts. So this is a build-up drum part. This is Powerhouse Nothing Sacred. All right, another build-up part you have is a build-up pylon part, right? Or a build-up, jump on some foo part. Right, the best to probably do this is Strife, and probably the best example is on the song Lift. So here's a build-up pylon part. All right, a lot of times we talk about this part of a song, and we refer to the Youth Crew toms. So I want to show an example of that. An example of the Youth Crew toms here. This is Youth of Today. The song Slow Down. All right, now I want to give one more example of the Youth Crew toms. This is Madball Across Your Face. All right, lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit of guitar stuff and talk the difference between a lead, a solo, and an octave. So I'm going to give you an example of a lead. This is like, it's basically a simplified solo, right? There's no wanking in it. It's done for like the purpose of making the song dope. And a perfect example of this is Bad Religion, Modern Man. All right, another perfect example of a lead is in a song called Lead Song by The Great Negative Approach. Here you go. All right, let's compare those two guitar leads to a true guitar solo. This is an ill solo. This is done by one of my favorite bands ever, In Cold Blood, the song Lost in Doubt. All right, an octave is not a lead or a solo. It's just when a guitarist, basically his hand is on the A string and like the power chord like formation, and you move your ring finger up to one higher string. And guitarists are gonna laugh at me for explaining it like this, but that's basically the basics of it. And so it makes this real nice sound, right? And you can just hold that note and the rest of the notes go, and it's a nice little like variation of kind of a lead, but it's like a simplified way of doing it. So this is an example of an octave. This is Ignite, Past Our Means. All right, and finally, for the 185 faithful, you knew I had to give you an example of a YOLO part. And so this is Powerhouse Ignorant 1. And let me explain what I think a YOLO part is. It's just when you're songwriting and you get to a part and you're like, I don't give a fuck if this makes sense or not. I'm going to get buck right here. So this is a great example. Like Powerhouse is basically like capped off this song, which is already great. And then they're just like, fuck it, let's go fast out of nowhere just because the people need it. So that's a YOLO part. This is Powerhouse Ignorant 1. All right, I'm going to bring in Dan and Ben, and we are going to talk about this. So, dudes, what did you think about that hardcore punk rock part starter kit? Dan, what do you think?
I think it provides a nice lexicon to people who listen to the pod on a regular basis to know when we just refer to the little vocab that we have amongst the three of us and Chris and others as well. It gives people an idea, but I'm sure some people were like, duh, I know a lot of this, but it's nice to frame it in the way that we talk about things. Also, how come Candiria was not used as YOLO?
Because I was trying to use clips, not an entire song of YOLO.
Yeah, true. The didgeridoo part is especially YOLO.
Dude. But yeah, Ben, what did you think about this? How was this list?
It's great. I'm glad you did it because some of these are things that everyone who listens to this kind of music, terminology that we all use, but then some of it is stuff I only ever hear you, Zach Nelson, using. So it's good that you did this to clarify. Like, I don't know if I've ever heard someone say, mid-tempo, up-tempo part. So it's good you have examples.
Don't you think that it's smart, though, to like kind of break that out? Because like mid-tempo is such a giant lane, you know? It could kind of be anything. It could be like Motorhead doing Killed by Death, like dun, 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 dun. Or it could be like that Turbo Negro song, right? Like dun, 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 dun. Like that's so different.
I mean, of course I'm glad because you're talking to the guy who came up with the idea of 1.5. I'm all about micromanaging music. So I'm all for it. I just was wondering, should we go through these in the order you talked them, or does it not matter?
I think that we don't need to go through everything, but if there's anything you want to talk on, let's talk on it. And like maybe go down the list for the ease of everything. So if people want to go back and so forth.
Well, not just because we were talking about mid-tempo, up-tempo, I'm just wondering, like, maybe it would be helpful to actually figure out like what beats per minute range would qualify as mid-tempo, up-tempo. You know what I mean?
No, because let's just
need some minutia that.
No, it's a feeling, right? And like this is things we talk about or like you read about in books, right? Like people talk parts, but I don't know if anyone's ever laid it out with examples. Like I'm sure there's like YouTube videos where it's like a 5-minute video on what a breakdown is, but fucking A, dude, I'm not gonna waste my life watching YouTube videos. Like I every YouTube video I watch, I feel dumber for watching.
Well, there's a couple things I'd say. It's interesting about referring to Right Brigade as a breakdown because technically you could also refer to it as like almost a build-up because the guitar breaks, which is part of the breakdown, but then it starts building up to the breakdown. It's interesting, you know.
Well, Dan, circle back to the drum build-up. That's what it's doing before the breakdown.
Exactly.
It's doing a drum build-up part. Dun, 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 Right Brigade. Dun, 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 Right Brigade. And then you're into the breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. See, I was going even further back to where the guitar breaks by itself and then the drums come in on it. But it's really good having all of this stuff because we're a hardcore podcast that actually talks about hardcore music and tries to analyze songs and output of musical stuff, which seems to be a little bit of a novel concept in the hardcore pod world. But the one thing I'm going to pull you up on is you said the drummer when referring to doot dat, and you didn't give a shout out to our boy Smelly. I mean, come on.
Shameful. That is shameful. My bad. I apologize, Smelly, king of the do-da-da-da.
There's a couple things that aren't on here that we do talk about.
Oh, it's not like you had 5 days to tell me that, didn't I?
Well,
didn't I
I
shoot
didn't
these to you?
see this list until just now, sir.
I sent all the files and said, "Go through these, please."
Well, I was too busy just worshiping Smelly and Noodles.
All right, well, give them to me. Let me write them down, and then if the people want them, I'll do them.
Okay. The talky 90s hardcore vocal.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because I think that is something that we do reference when doing our Super 7s, and then also as newer bands are channeling the 90s quite a bit lately.
That's a good one. We'll do it for next round. What else?
And then the Integrity Whisper.
Yes,
Oh,
I
the
was just
Whisper.
going to say that Whispercore. That's what we used to call it, Whispercore.
Yeah. I think though, because all of this other stuff is very instrument based, but it'll be kind of neat to pull out a few vocal tropes that we have seen repeat over time.
And if anyone ever questions why sometimes I talk about quitting the pod, it's for this. When you lay out 31 things, it's like, well, what about this?
Well, I mean, it's just things we talk about. It's not a big deal. It's just something that pops in my mind just after seeing this. Especially, do you know what, though? While listening to all of that, all of these examples are so good and the songs are so good that I kept repeatedly getting mad as the little clip ended. I'm like,
Me
I
too.
want to hear more.
Me too.
Yeah, that was pretty painful. I feel that too, But yeah, we'll make a playlist, dude. No big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Fuck yeah, I want this playlist.
Yeah. I mean, this was fun to do. It was like,
Myers.
yeah, just chuck Lori Myers on there, dude. Fuck it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this took so long to make. I just thought it was kind of important because we always talk music, and everyone that's in a band knows that each band has its own language. And that's a very critical part of being in a band, being able to communicate musically with each other. And so, some people sing drum parts to each other like we do sometimes on the pod, right? Like, all right, go do that, do that, or go do that, do that, People can do that, or you can communicate in the language, right? Like, all right, let's do a drum build up here into a breakdown, then we're going to drop to a mosh part, then we're going to drop again to a beatdown part. You know what I mean?
And then back to another mosh part, and then back to another beatdown part, and Ben's head's going to explode.
Then we're going to come out of it to a bounce part.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like,
And then Bedge is going to jump off a building.
Yeah.
this is fun because, yeah, I mean, I think the best thing we do on this podcast is break down music, right? I think we do a pretty good job of it. And this is just kind of like a glossary of terms that we refer to. And again, most of the stuff people are going to know, but most of the stuff people might not know. Who knows? And that's a thing. We're kind of anti-gatekeeping this shit, right? Here's everything I know, and, a bunch of the shit I can get skewered for, and people can say I'm wrong, right? So, I don't know. It is what it is. I thought it was a cool thing to do. And just like anything, like the top 100 list, just got to put it out there, man. If you got one, put it out. I'll listen to it. You know what I mean?
The Modern Man lead was dangling very close to Solo. But you're right, it's a lead, but it's a very intense lead where it's doing a lot.
Yes, the back end of that lead is very close to Solo. Yeah. And that's the thing with a lot of this stuff. A lot of it is gray area, right? What's a breakdown? What's a mosh part? Whatever. I'm just saying, these are easy ways for me to break it down. You're not wrong if you call, any sort of mosh part a breakdown, or if you call any breakdown a mosh part. It's just kind of sometimes easier to label stuff so we know a little bit of each other's, musical language.
Absolutely, and almost the crowd decides if it's a mosh part or a breakdown, right? If
that's true.
Fucking crazy, it's a mosh part.
Yeah.
The perfect band to demonstrate leads, I feel, is Coxbara.
Yes, agreed. Although that dude can shred too.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm saying, like, on almost every song, the melodious part that you just absolutely love is the lead.
Yeah. Ding 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 ding.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, those are perfect leads. And Screeching Weasel's one also.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Screeching Weasel has all the great leads, and I don't know if they ever solo. Ben, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just thinking the other one was Rodeo Clown Lifetime, which Dan said was very Screeching Weasel influenced. It's like it's a repeating melodic guitar line, because a solo you wouldn't repeat. That would be really strange if you repeated a solo, like note for note.
Although, you know what? There are examples of that, including the solo I included on here. On this song, the dude does it twice. And then there's also a 15 song on the album Lucky. I think it's the song Lucky. The dude does the same solo twice. It's pretty ill, dude. You know, when you got it, fuck it.
Amazing.
But those are abnormalities. Those are the only two examples I can think of where someone does the same solo twice.
I had a song like that when Jeff Capra was in my band Surprise Vacation. There was one part of the song where I did the solo, and there was one part of the song where he did the solo, and I'm like, it's the same. He like just learned what I did and just did it again. But
that's kind of cool.
It's not in there anymore. It's like the first one's gone, the second one's still there. But I wanted to get into some of these terms, like double time. I never knew that related to the hi-hat. I just thought double time was just meant like you're playing fast, or you're doubling the BPMs of a song of a beat that you're coming out of. You know, it's like half time you're cutting in half the BPMs of the beat you're coming out of. But I don't know, like, because I'm not a drummer, so.
That's a good point. I guess I don't know either. I was just assuming.
Yeah, if it's like 50 BPM and then you go to 100, it's like you double timed it. Like you hear it a lot. I mean, I don't even know if maybe this isn't, I'm not even using this correct, but like on a lot of rock and roll songs from the early 60s, as they're fading out, like at the end of the song, because they're almost all fade outs, you hear the drummer just start playing everything twice as fast, which is still not that fast relative to, you know, all this punk shit that comes around years later. And I'm like, oh, there it is again. Like when you start noticing something, like you notice it all the time. So anytime a song like that happens, I'm like, oh, it's the double time. Like, how can you get out of this song without doing that? It's just too fun not to do it.
Right on. What else you want to dive into? Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I like the clarification of the cheat beat, or the fast cheat beat, because in my head, I've always thought the scissor beat and the cheat beat were somewhat the same. Because I've always thought the scissor beat, well, actually not in the last couple of years since we've been doing the pod, because I've kind of learned from the way that you reference the two different things. But I've always, like, when people have talked about the cheat beat, it's like been in almost like a negative context, but it's a great beat.
It's great when it's used right, you know. Yeah. So like Floor Punch, they'll have songs where they do straight double time, but when they want to get fast and buck, a lot of times they have those really short verses, and they'll do the scissor beat, like on this example. And then also, like, for, you know, this Agnostic Front chorus of Last Warning, it works perfectly when it's done sparingly. It is an example of a cheat beat for, like, a lot of, you know, in the 90s, like when you'd see like a Bad Crust band, you know, like that, this would be like their default fast beat. So like if you're playing that scissor beat for like a 2-minute song, it sounds terrible. But if you're using it as a part, it's super ill.
Yeah, it's really good transition or verse parts, right? But yeah, like an entire song of it, it's grinding on you.
For sure. Ben, anything else you wanted to dig into?
An example of tasteful scissor beats would be the Unity 7-inch, the UR1 7-inch. A lot of that is scissor beats, and it sounds awesome. And you always talk about how part of what makes it sound good is the way the drums are mic'd. You say the hi-hat's mic'd louder than the bass drum, or did I get that completely wrong, backwards?
No, it's just the snare is mic'd loud, right? So you want to bring the miking down on the hi-hats, because you don't want it to sound like you just want it to sound like a straight fast beat, because they're doing it for like the full verse and chorus, unless they do a tempo change. That's a lot of scissor beat on that record, but it's recorded so nicely. It sounds good. I'm trying to think. There was another record I was listening to, and I was like, I know that there's like these different beats on it, or I think it was a scissor beat, and I couldn't hear the hi-hat recorded at all. I'll try to think of what record it is, but it's driving me crazy now.
No, for an
It's like a notable record, and I was like, fuck, I can't hear the hi-hat at all.
Casey Jones does it a lot on that first No for an Answer 7-inch, the You Laugh EP. There's a lot of it's very scissory, and then you have Chris Bratton replacing him on the No for an Answer LP, so you hear like what the difference between the Chain of Strength guy playing in that band versus the scissor guy. And the battery cheat beat that you used as an example, that always bothered me because it sounds like he's playing the beat backwards. And then you hear where like the guitar changes, and then it kind of it resets my brain. Like, oh, he's playing it forwards, but there's something about like when the guitar is just ringing out. So you don't have the structure to follow like the beginning of the measure versus the end of the measure. And so do you ever get that? Does that happen to you?
So here's a beat I left out, there's a few beats. I forgot to do these ones, and I'll do them if we do an update. Like the Leave It Alone beat, the NoFX, where the snare's on the 1. It's like snare 1, kick 2. And then also the Fear beat is like that as well. Datu, 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 datu. Then there was a bunch of like NorCal hardcore bands in the late 90s that did that too. It's like a backwards fast beat. It's very interesting. The battery beat is not backwards. What I think he does is he's supposed to do da, do da, do da, do da, do da. But he just starts with do da, do da, do da, do da, do da, do da. He doesn't do the do da, do da, do da first. So it's like the kick drum is almost backwards, but the snare is still on the right. The snare is still on the 2 and the 4. So like the fast beat isn't backwards. The kick drums are just wonky. But that was like a recording where you could really hear the hi-hat and the snare and the kick drum well. So I wanted to use that as an example of a fast cheat beat, because he's doing a fast beat where the snare's on the 2, but like he's not doing the hi-hat very often, right? He's not doing double time on the hi-hat.
Yeah, I think it's because exactly how you describe it. Like it starts out missing that beginning part, and it throws me off, and it makes me think everything's pushed forward like one beat. So so it makes it sound like he's playing it backwards, and then you hear like the vocal or the guitar come in, and you're like, oh, he's actually playing it forward, but in my brain it was backwards the entire time. And it'll shift like throughout the course of a Battery song, like many times, like, okay, now it sounds backwards to me again. Okay, now it sounds forward. Anyway, it's annoying. And Mouthpiece Guy plays a cheat beat too, but it's different, and I never get that weird like backwards vibe from the Mouthpiece Guy. So I mean, he's not playing exactly the same beat, but he's still cheating.
He's doing a variation of the scissor beat. It's a weird cheat beat. And then it's strange because on the first Main Strike LP, they mimic that Mouthpiece beat. So it's done twice. It's pretty crazy. And then on the second Main Strike LP, the drummer rips. So anyway.
Yeah. And do that. We found a video. Now I can't find it anymore, but you showed it to me, of Smelly explaining how he came up with that beat and how it's the first half of the 2-measure phrase from In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly, because it's do dat do do dat do dat do dat. But if you just go do dat do do dat and you loop that and play it like 10 times faster, it's do dat do dat do dat do dat do dat do dat. And it's like, who would ever figure that out if he didn't tell us that? Like, we die not knowing that it's just the first half of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida times, sped up ridiculously. So that's cool.
Yeah, I think he said it on like an Instagram story or something, so it's probably just like gone.
Yeah, and that guy, the drummer, whose name escapes me right now, just died like, I don't know, within the last 6 months or so. So rest in peace. accidental dat inventor. And then
Sorry. And what else, Ben? Sorry.
What a touching tribute.
rest in peace, dude.
Oh, I love it.
All right, let's wrap this up. But Ben, final stuff.
So please help me with the difference between a mosh part and a breakdown as you define them again, just really briefly.
Okay, let's do them in the order of fastest to slowest. I would say that a 2-step beat is the fastest, right? It's a breakdown, but the tempo is almost too fast to like mosh to in the traditional sense. So you have like the people skanking, right? Then I have a breakdown, which is just a little slower than the 2-step. Then I have a mosh part that's slower than a breakdown, and then I would have a beat down part that is slower than a mosh part.
Okay, that makes sense.
Dan, final thoughts.
I would say there's one we refer to like caveman beat or Neanderthal beat. What would that fall in? It's like D beat, but different. What would it be?
It's a variation of the slow fast.
Okay.
So, but it's just doing
It's cheap beat slow
do
fast.
that, do that, do that, do that. No, it's not. It's like it's a slow fast. But instead of doing do that, do that, do that, or do that, do that, do that, do that, it's just going do that, do that, do that, do that, do that. But he's still hitting the hi-hat he's hitting it 2 times for every snare hit.
Okay, I get you. Or floor tom sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the floor tom, the cymbal, the ride, or the hi-hat. Right? All those can like sub in.
Yeah, this is great because it just is just fun to talk all this stuff. If I was going to pick I'm going to give you my 3 favorite beats since we've got them all down. Number 1, Youth Crew Toms. Just have to. I mean, I want Youth Crew Toms to be like a button you press on my gravestone, and then just Youth Crew Toms happen. Next would be because I'm just it's not as common in many songs, but when it is, oh my god, it's just the best. The slow bounce beat, and then you just got to have the classic slow fast. Mid tempo's really close, but slow fast is my number 3.
If I just choose a number 1 right now, it's got to be the scissor beat, dude. Because when it's done tastefully, it is like what keeps hardcore rooted in being wild man music, right? It's like if you play in front of like a music professor, they're like, "What the fuck is that?" It's like, well, it's the heart of this thing we call hardcore. Is getting buck. So I think
Get out of here, Professor.
I always
all right, Ben, you got anything else?
Yeah, the blast beat. I for some reason I thought blast beat means you're hitting the snare, the hi-hat, and the kick drum all at the same time every time. But I learned something new today. You don't necessarily have to do that, and it can still be a blast beat.
Right, because if I've watched a few videos on that, and like a lot of the dudes that do blast beats. So assuming you're a right-handed drummer, you're hitting the snare on every beat. They're not hitting. They might just be hitting like the ride on every other one. So it's like they're not being fast with their right hand; they're just being fast with their left hand.
But usually the foot and the snare are in coordination for every.
Yeah, I think the kick has to be, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, dude. Not my musical forte. I just tossed it in here because it's a hardcore band that does it well, and it would be bad for me to omit it. But I'm definitely not an expert on the blast beat, so don't get at me, people.
The Locust or Infest, perhaps. Good places to look for it.
Infest, a lot of scissor beat, no blast beat.
Oh, no blast beat. But Locust, definitely blast beat.
Cosplay, not hardcore.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Oh,